Thanks for choosing to listen to this Late Night Linux Family podcast. We're only able to do this because of the people who support us. None of our shows are paywalled, but our Patreon supporters can get most episodes early and never hear any ads. Learn more at latenightlinux.com/support or support us by telling a friend or colleague about everything we do. Hello and welcome to episode 123 of Linux After Dark. I'm Joe.
I'm Chris.
I'm Gary.
And I'm May.
Welcome back all. A few months ago we talked about the dire hardware situation, how RAM is ridiculously expensive and SSDs and CPUs and everything, and what we would tell people who come to us for advice about that. And in that episode, we talked about make, do, and mend. And so I thought it might be interesting to expand that, because here we are a few months later and it's just not got any better. In fact, it's got worse. So I'm thinking tips to minimize resource usage, getting by with less RAM than you'd like, extending the life of your server or laptop, and making the most of the hardware you already have. I mean, my first tip is, especially headless, you'd be very surprised what you can do on relatively meager hardware.
That's a discovery that everyone makes with Linux, right? Is that once you take away the graphical interface, you can actually run your entire house off of that 10-year-old laptop that you have.
Yeah, and it's got better now, hasn't it? Recently, I mentioned in my job, I've been creating VM stacks, but I also experimented with the same sort of stack of VMs in containers. And it's remarkable how much you can save on resources if you put your shoulder into it. And there's different options now for that, Docker, Podman, all sorts of things. So headless, it's great, isn't it? But on the desktop, it's harder.
Is it that hard though?
It depends how little RAM you have available, right?
I mean, Ubuntu's minimum requirements now are 6 gigs of RAM, and I don't know how long people have actually been shipping minimum laptops with that.
You can still buy laptops with 4 gigabytes of RAM in a shop. You shouldn't, but you can. And I imagine the sales of those will be pushed because of the cost of RAM. If they already exist in boxes, and the general consensus is that the level of RAM drops down, but it does feel very tight. One thing I've always found that improves situation when you've got very limited RAM on the desktop is a well-configured ZRAM or ZSwap, which is what Chromebooks have done for ages. But the thing I loved about Gallium OS is that it used the same sort of settings that Chrome OS did, but made them available in GitHub so that you could copy them. And that tended to make a difference tangibly when there was very little RAM around. So I use ZRAM on basically everything now in lieu of a swap file or swap partition on anything.
So that's compressing the RAM effectively?
Yes, and back in the day, that would have been taxing on your CPU, for example, but compression algorithms have really improved and CPUs in general are faster, so the overhead is much less tangible. So if you configure it, I believe Fedora, for example, just does it out of the box now, and it is just generally very good now, and I would always do it on my machines.
Unless you're running something super, super old that can't do that hardware accelerated decompression of the RAM, I suppose.
Yeah, or if you need Hibernate, which some people still want to use on Linux, even though a lot of distros disable it. If you need a consistent and large, reliable swap partition or file, that's when you'd use that. But otherwise, ZRAM, you can set a percentage of your physical RAM to be compressed and swapped out within RAM, which is still much, much faster than even NVMe. So as long as you get the configuration right, that's a really easy way to make it go further, I think.
And what about the desktop itself then? We used to talk about lightweight distros and lightweight desktop environments like XFCE and LXDE. Does that really make that much difference in terms of RAM?
I don't actually know anymore. I mean, I've thrown GNOME on some pretty low-end stuff in the last certainly 4 or 5 years, like Chromebooks with 2 gig of RAM, and haven't noticed a huge difference between that and running something like XFCE. But maybe that was just a fluke, or maybe I just do all of my computing somewhere else.
There used to be years ago a blog, I think, that was published every year comparing the cold boot RAM usage when RAM was tighter. But I think the way that we use computers means that some people obsess over it, but I don't think, there's a huge, people are going to email in, here we go. But I certainly haven't noticed it as much. Like even when I've tried Plasma out recently, it's fairly svelte compared to XFCE when you boot it. It's what you do after that makes more of a difference.
Yeah, the second you start opening a couple of browser tabs, any advantage that you've got from the lighter weight desktop just disappears effectively.
Yeah, my extensions alone in Firefox are 200 megabytes of RAM, and this tab that we're talking over is 153. When you're talking about numbers of that, like, saving 100 megs from your desktop doesn't sound all that interesting anymore.
What about changing the way you use the computer then? And just accepting that you can't do loads of things at once and you're going to have to do it a bit more old school if you've got limited RAM?
That's certainly possible. Quite a while ago, I ended up trapped in France inadvertently because the Eurostar was shut. So I had only an 8 gigabyte of RAM beta laptop that I had to work from. So I tunneled into work via Termux on my phone for the terminal. And then I was accessing my day-to-day in work. But I just had to be a little bit mindful of how I multitasked. But once I got used to it, the only difficult thing for me then is, things like VMs and stuff that I might spin up for testing, I had to just not do that day. But for a broad desktop computer paradigm, you can configure web browsers to sleep tabs as you switch around and everything. And a lot of them have that behavior built in. It's certainly possible to do, and you can still get your computing done. What can help is TUIs for things. If an application has an API and an enthusiastic Rust developer that likes to use it, you can use a TUI to access that API if you don't need the flashbang of the full-fat desktop application. So that's another alternative. And it depends what you're doing. If it's like a music thing or anything, but if it's not inherently a visual thing, then that can actually be quite handy to do as you get used to it.
A TUI for music. Might this have anything to do with Spotify?
Well, I don't use it anymore, Joe. So, I wouldn't be bringing that one up. But yes, that is one thing. But it's certainly possible to drive around via a keyboard. And Phelim's mentioned some apps sometimes that allow you, some of the recommendations. They do often tend to be Rust, like network tools and things like that. But a well-written TUI, which is not very accessible, sorry, Florian, but in Rust, then tends to be a way to save on RAM usage, I think.
And one of the things I've started doing recently on the lower end laptop that I now daily drive is just to run stuff in the browser. I used to run things like WhatsApp and Telegram as their Electron apps, and I just don't do that on that machine anymore because they're all running their own instance of a browser engine, which, although negligible across 5 or 6 apps, does add up.
And so running them in the browser really does use less RAM then?
Well, certainly if I'm running them in Firefox and not Chrome, yes.
Right. I mean, I very, very rarely install Telegram because of web.telegram.org is just good enough.
Yeah, see, I rely on it quite a lot to get notifications and things, and my browsers don't get notification access as a general rule. So that's why I end up running the separate desktop app. But the daily machine has got 24 gig of RAM, so I don't really think about RAM usage that much. It's just when I go on the road and I suddenly only got 8 that it's important.
I think the VM thing is huge, actually, because I was at an event last year and I only took with me my X1 Carbon, which has got 8 gig of soldered RAM. And there was something I wanted to try out, and I tried to do it in a VM, but I could only really give it 4, and then I only had 4 for day-to-day stuff, and it just was not enough.
Yeah, even my machine at work has 16 gigs. And when you're trying to stage a relatively simple cluster of servers that's not that ambitious, you have to give a certain amount over to each VM for it to function, especially if it has like a Java heap in it. Even if you tune the Java settings to use the least possible RAM, before you know it, you've run out, and, swap can only get you so far. And I think if you're working in that, it's quite tricky, really. There's not really a way around that. I was looking around me thinking, maybe there's a machine I can put some more RAM in to offset this, because ideally you want to run that cluster on the same physical machine. But even DDR3, so this old laptop, I could probably get 16 gigs instead of 8, but even that is expensive. Like I resent paying the prices for it. So I kind of try as much as possible to split it across 2 physical machines. Or as I said, fall back to containers, which can be a little bit more clever and economical with those resources, I think.
Yeah, see, maybe I've already adapted to some of this stuff then, because I just don't run VMs locally that often. They all go on the Proxmox cluster in the garage. So I think I've probably subconsciously done some of these optimization activities just by separating out tasks to machines that I don't sit at every day.
I mean, that's all well and good if you have the other machine to do that, but we're talking about probably mini PCs and old laptops. I guess if you're running everything headless, then that helps out a little bit.
And what about the idea of starving VMs of RAM? That's something that Jim likes to talk about on 2.5 Admins. He advocates giving the virtual machine as little RAM as you possibly can get away with. What do we think of that?
I think it's efficient if you can get away with it. But if your applications are literally ooming in that VM, then you've taken it too far. I think it depends what you're running inside. And unfortunately, in my job, some software is not as optimized as it might be, shall we say.
Yeah, if we're talking something like Jenkins, something that needs a Java VM, you're probably going to have more problems than it's worth.
Yeah, I mean, you get into the thing very quickly of tuning like JVM variables, don't you? And that's pretty painful.
Yeah, and you're robbing Peter to pay Paul in the end, and then you get it to work in inverted commas, but not well and not reliably. So I think it depends, but I think Jim's right. Like, you should do that if you have a known stack and it's fairly tuned, because you're getting the most bang for your buck, really.
I mean, you can monitor it, can't you? And then provision it accordingly. Like, provision it with more than you need, run it up for a bit, monitor it, see how much you're actually using, and then re-provision the amount of RAM.
Yeah, I mean, that's been my strategy for the Docker app servers that I run for quite a while, is that actually their workload is relatively static. Recently, I added something new, or actually migrated an application off of my on-prem app server VM into one that I've got that sits on some boxes that I've got in Kalo. And it had 6 gig of RAM. I moved the application on it. It started ooming. I gave it another couple of gigs of RAM, and now it's sitting quite happily at 88% utilization. So that feels relatively efficient. So yeah, I keep it as small as I can until the whole stack falls over, and then just throw a little bit more at it. That's relatively easy to do, though, when the host has got 64 gigs in it. So, it's not something that you could do where you're running an app server on a box with a tiny amount of memory, and you couldn't just throw more at it.
It does really feel like RAM is the major one that is painful at the moment, despite prices going up on storage. Certainly in my experience, I have enough storage. I don't worry too much about that. And I've actually got NVMe drives and SATA SSDs sat in drawers as spares that I can bring in. I haven't felt it as much. It really is the RAM. I have a bunch of like SODIMMs in a drawer, but they're all 2 gig and 4 gig sticks. And a lot of the machines have 2 slots anyway. So you just can't get it up. I've got one 8 gig. That was an unfortunate turn of phrase. You children. I've got one 8 gig SODIMM lying about, but to make the most of the hardware I've already got, because generally hardware prices are going up, there isn't a way I can configure my envelope full of SODIMMs to get more than 8 gigs of RAM in a lot of machines. And that's why it's so hard. You look for secondhand RAM, which I always would have done as I needed more. And I just think I can't pay this at the moment. Surely this is going to come to an end.
Is there something to be said for distributing things more now? Because surely if you're in this audience, you either have the stack of laptops or you know someone who does and can get like a whole bunch of machines with only a few gigs of RAM. Is it time to start clustering things with Proxmox or, I don't know, does anyone still use Docker Swarm?
That works for headless stuff, right? I mean, my home production cluster is a couple of Wise 5070s and then a slightly more powerful Optiplex micro box. And yeah, I've got a bunch of stuff clustered on there, and I keep most of it on the more powerful box unless that reboots and then it fails over to the Wise box. I mean, my Plex server, I was saying to Chris earlier today, is a Wise 5070, and that does all of the transcoding and everything that I need. But I'm not going to run any other workloads on that box at the same time. So I think splitting it out for headless stuff is a reasonable option, assuming you can tolerate the power draw.
I mean, I remember when RAM was cheap, or cheaper. And there was this idea of you may as well stick it all on one box and just run a load of containers or VMs. And it feels like we're kind of having to regress then to an older world where you would actually use like a Raspberry Pi for your Pi hole rather than just stick it in a container, for example.
I mean, yeah, we always end up with things being cycles, right? This is just the take everything back apart cycle. We'll have a put it all back together cycle later.
And ultimately, that's what I started to do with stuff that I needed. You know, I have quite a few routers lying around, some of which can bridge a Wi-Fi connection, but then give you all of the Ethernet ports. So once you have a physical Ethernet connection to all of the hardware on the other side of that switch, you can bridge. So if you put something like Proxmox or any kind of decent Linux distribution, you can bridge and VLAN across that, and you can distribute the services and they can speak across that switch, and it does get you there. And in fact, for some of the stuff I've been doing, I was only using VMs because it's a representation. Ultimately, in production, that would be separate physical hardware anyway. So it's kind of taking you through. So I think you're right. I was reading our fellow presenter Shane from Hybrid Cloud Show's home Kubernetes cluster, because I'd not read it before, and he keeps a live blog of what the hardware setup is. And I sent it to a friend of mine, and we were both pleasantly shocked at the configuration of the hardware, which is a selection of laptops and mini PCs that is, you know, ultimately for his experimentation. So it's perfectly possible to bolt all that together and still get mileage out of it, as long as your expectations are reasonable, I would say.
So do we talk about gaming or anything like that?
Well, the answer to that is only play Sensible World of Soccer.
What, for the Amiga?
Yeah, emulated on like a Raspberry Pi 1.
There's been quite a few, at least that have crossed my path, written articles and videos recently. On a recent 2.5 Admins episode, there was kind of Jim and Alan were discussing the desktop computer paradigm. Explaining Computers recently have published a video, which is also about, is the box under your desk paradigm going to come to a close? Will we be able to converge the GPU that we're used to having as a big fat box into these unified processors? So maybe we're just kind of ahead of the game there. And I don't mind not playing AAA games, but I know that some people do really want to do that. But maybe that paradigm is going to come to an end anyway, so we don't have to worry about it too much.
I think the death of all of that is kind of exaggerated at the moment, though. Like, sure, it's hard to get something that's high-end right now, but I don't think it's been as easy as it was before either. So what I found out is that it's actually possible to play more than you'd expect on older hardware than you'd expect. I've been playing Beat Saber and other VR games on a GTX 1080 Ti, which was no slouch when it came out, for sure, but you can have it for like $100 or $150 now in the US. So it's not great anymore, but it can do a lot more than you think. And you can do a lot more than you think with a lot less than you think, especially if you're okay with turning down settings, which I haven't even had to.
Well, I was going to say, like, playing at 1080 rather than 1440 or 4K, like that must make a huge difference to resource usage. But does it really matter if you're playing at a slightly lower resolution?
Not if you're saving hundreds of dollars, right?
Yeah, of course. And I mean, it kind of depends on how big your screen is, whether those extra pixels are worth it or not. And everyone's trying to do frame generation and stuff right now. But at least for even VR games, the 1080 Ti is surprisingly good and surprisingly cheap. Although it also has a surprising power bill.
But isn't it like with movies and TV shows? Like, if the movie or TV show is really good, then it doesn't really matter how good the quality is above a certain level. Like if you're streaming it on a mobile connection or whatever, and you end up with, you know, a slightly lower bit rate from Netflix or whatever, yeah, you can kind of notice it at first. But if the story and acting and everything is good, then you kind of immerse yourself in it and forget about it. I
mean, the whole console wars that happened a few years ago kind of surrounded this topic of like, oh, are graphics really all that important? And the answer is, you know, kind of play the games that you want, make it as good as you want, and like, don't sweat the rest. Don't try to get the best you possibly can because you're just going to be chasing nothing forever. Enjoy what you have.
I mean, we joke about Sensible World of Soccer, but Chris, you do actually play that, don't you?
I literally do. Like, it's so good. The gameplay is unbeatable, even compared to any more modern football game. And recently I got a Miu Mini, which is a very cheap, like ARM-based Game Boy, essentially, that you can put loads of different emulators on. And I played it on that, and it's an absolute joy. And yeah, they update the player database if you're into football, the right players that are at the right teams. But a lot of content creators have started buying up old hardware, because I look at eBay and often think, God, people are still churning out loads of old stuff. But if you get a decent 4th gen or newer, like quad-core CPU, and pair it with, as you say, like a 1080 Ti or something, there's a whole tranche of games that will play acceptably on that, and you'll have hours and hours of fun. And if you forget running Windows with its kind of arbitrary requirements for newer versions, you can genuinely build something that's quite cheap and ride out this. So I think that's a positive area.
The Patient Gamers subreddit is eating good right now.
I mean, is the solution to all of this just to be a bit more zen? And like accept the stuff that you have now and enjoy it?
Perhaps consumerism is the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, certainly for me, having moved to a lower end laptop than the one I had 6 months ago, I've just adjusted what I do and don't do while I'm traveling with the laptop. I'm not going to be able to record 48 channels of audio into a DAW like I could with the old laptop. But also I need to do that like maybe once a year. So it doesn't really matter that much, does it? Just find a way around it. You just have to adjust your expectations accordingly.
And I think a lot of people are a lot more patient with computers than we are. I think we've talked about that before. So I think people just don't notice when their computer is slow compared to us.
Do you think there are still people out there using Windows laptops with spinning hard drives in them?
Yes, there absolutely are.
Of course. I see them in coffee shops all the time. People don't care about performance tuning of a computer. It's literally on or off. And if it gets there, they don't have any experience of using another machine, then it's fine. It's working, isn't it?
What's the Windows swap thing? Page file or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So they must be using that all the time.
But they get there in the end. They get to the end of the form they're filling out or the document they're writing, and they carry on, I guess. But we want more.
Yeah, I mean, I spec'd and built a computer for someone, it must have been a couple of years ago. And their previous one was, I think it was like a Think Center or whatever, like, you know, the small form factor Lenovo's. And it was like a 4th gen or something with a spinning hard drive in it. And, you know, I ended up speccing him something modern, and it's like amazingly fast compared to it. But he said that he would turn it on in the morning and then he would have to go and like have his breakfast before it was ready to actually use.
But that's what people do, right? They turn up at the office, boot their laptop, and then go to the kitchen and make a coffee. That is what people have done for years and continue to do.
I mean, people tape their glasses with sellotape together, and people drive cars held together with duct tape. Like, they just do. If they're not that enthusiastic about it, and it is literally just a service-providing appliance, then yeah, their tolerance level is completely different to ours.
So yes, perhaps we do need to be more zen.
Yeah, I think you're right. People just use their computer to accomplish a task, at least normal people, and they don't need anything better.
And for us, I think we've laid out plenty of ways to make the old hardware work better.
Yeah, just have a stack of laptops. That's the answer.
Or bum one off your friend who has one.
Yeah, and if there's ever a free laptop going, don't say no. Well, right now, I feel like it was a good move to hoard all these old machines because, you know, you can swap RAM out of them and, you know, take spare parts. And if one breaks, I'm not completely knackered.
That's very true, Joe. Like the Wise 5070s I have variously been routers, retro gaming machines. I put extra RAM in. So yeah, absolutely. Shuffle the stack, deal a different hand, see what you can do this week.
Right. Well, on that positive note, we should probably get out of here then. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. Until then, I've been Joe.
I've been Chris.
I've been Gary.
And I've been May.
See you later.